It's hard to believe we're less than 2 weeks away from the newest Pokemon generation. X and Y seem to be a tremendous step forward for the series, but before we move on, I thought it may be fun to look back, specifically at my favorite Pokemon of the years. There are 649 in total as of Pokemon Black and White, a number that will surely increase to near 800 as the 6th generation arrives, so you would think it would be hard to narrow it down to just 10, but it was surprisingly simple. Like all Pokemon players, I have stories associated with each one, and as I tell mine, I'd love to hear yours. So please, join me as I count down my top 10 favorite Pokemon. Like many of the original batch of Pokemon fans, I drifted away from the series at the end of the 2nd generation. I was growing older and I was slowly buying into the fact that maybe Pokemon really was just a fad. It wasn't until college that I began to look back at the series. Diamond and Pearl were coming out soon, and I began to feel nostalgic for the old games. But I only had my DS Lite with me and had no way to play them, so I bought Pokemon Emerald. In truth, I wasn't impressed with it at first. The fun times I had with Gold and Silver were fresh in my mind and it just didn't seem to compare. Even the Pokemon seemed to be subpar imitations of the past. But as I kept playing, the old fun came back and I stumbled across a Ralts. I've always loved Psychic Pokemon since they match my battling style so well, and when it finally evolved into Gardevoir, it became a permanent part of my team. It had a unique design that was very much in the vein of Pokemon, and really I think it helped open me back up to the Pokemon series. Ever since Emerald, I have not missed a single main series Pokemon game. It proved to me that all the predictions that the series was nothing more than a fad were completely wrong. By now, everyone knows that the 3 starters of each generation are the designs that are the most scrutinized. Both the developers and the fans pore over all 3 of these Pokemon to make sure they are unique, cute, and best represent all the Pokemon you'll be catching on the journey ahead. And in my opinion, the 5th generation had one of the best lineups since the 2nd. I liked each of the designs, but there was something about Snivy that stood out to me. Maybe it was his cocksure attitude or all the memes made about him at the time. I'm sure many people still refer to him as Smugleaf, but he was the one I chose and I didn't regret the decision at all. I loved his speed and his higher focus on defense, something I rarely worry about when creating Pokemon teams. There was just something that endeared him to me. I eventually tried out the other starters and enjoyed them as well, but never quite to the degree that I had with Snivy. There's something special about the Eevee evolutions. Even back in the original, fans had a special affinity for Jolteon, Flareon, and Vaporeon. But perhaps it was just me, but I never grew especially attached to them. Don't get me wrong, I thought they looked great and the idea of one Pokemon having many evolutions was cool to me, but none of them caught my attention. That is, until Umbreon was announced. There was always something alluring about the Dark type. I was well aware of how powerful Psychic Pokemon were in Red and Blue, and the thought of Dark types completely shutting them down excited me. But few of the new Dark type Pokemon caught my attention. I enjoyed all of their designs, but their actual fighting ability never really matched my style, until I found Umbreon. The design just looked really cool and I thought the moves worked well enough, though I'll admit it wasn't the strongest on my team. I think I love it so much because it perfectly matched the way I play Pokemon in general, in other words mostly at night. So when my Eevee naturally evolved into Umbreon one night, I was happily surprised and used the heck out of him. Over the years, Dark type Pokemon have lost a bit of their allure to me, but I'll always remember Umbreon. When I was a kid playing Red and Blue for the first time, I loved Articuno. He was always a part of my team because of how easily he could destroy Lance's dragons. That made him awesome in my mind. Of course, this was before I realized that using legendary Pokemon in your team was kind of looked down upon, but even taking out the fact that Articuno kicked ass, which he did, he was also the first legendary Pokemon I caught. I know I make myself sound old when I say this, but legendary Pokemon felt more legendary back in the original games. Now there's over 30 that can be found and caught. Some are pretty easy, others are locked away behind special events. But in Red, Blue, and Yellow, Articuno was one of only 4 legendaries that could be caught in-game. It made him feel special. Cyndaquil is an odd choice for me, mainly because he wasn't my starter in Gold and Silver. Totodile was. And as much as I love the little guy, I couldn't help but be jealous of a friend who had chosen Cyndaquil. Totodile was cute, but Cyndaquil was adorable. Croconaw kind of lost some of the appeal Totodile had, while Koalava looked sleek and powerful. Feraligatr felt like an ugly mess to me, especially compared to the raw power of Typhlosion. Don't get me wrong, I still liked Totodile as a first choice. It was just obvious to me by the end of the game that Cyndaquil would have been a better choice. So when I did choose him in the Heart Gold and Soul Silver remakes, it felt right, and it was fun to experience the game with him. It's a strange example of your first choice not necessarily being the best choice, at least when it comes to picking starters. Something I learned again when I chose Chimchar over Piplup in Diamond and Pearl. I don't think I know a single person who played Pokemon and didn't like Butterfree. It's pretty much the perfect early game Pokemon, and it has purpose too, much like Weedle's evolutionary line, which is to show new players that Pokemon can evolve. Since it happened so early to Caterpie and Weedle, new players immediately realized that evolution is possible. But I always preferred Caterpie over Weedle, and especially Butterfree over Beedrill. Butterfree just seemed to wreck other Pokemon in the early game, especially thanks to it learning Confusion early on. That single move could get you through most problems early on, and because of that, Butterfree stayed a part of my team for a long time. I only replaced it once I learned that Kadabra was much more powerful, but I still prefer Butterfree because he's the original, one of the first Pokemon you catch and a great teaching tool. I don't know many people who like Kingdra as much as I do, and I'm not sure I understand why I like Kingdra so much, especially because I was never a huge fan of either Horsea or Seadra. Actually, that's a lie. I love Kingdra because of his typing, Water Dragon. This makes him the only non-legendary dragon type that has no weakness to ice moves, and with the rarity of dragon types at the time, I thought that made him an unbelievable addition. Of course, with X and Y, he'll now also have to contend with fairy type moves, but I don't believe that will hurt him too much, especially because of his stats. Other than his HP and speed, his other stats are completely even across the board. This makes him an excellent option to fill in wherever you need him. But what I find truly interesting about Kingdra is that he's the only Pokemon on this list that I chose for stats alone. There aren't any sentimental stories or anything like that, I simply love his potential in battle. Look at any top 10 list involving Pokemon and Mewtwo will be there, and I'm no different. It's hard not to be when it comes to Mewtwo. As I said with Articuno, Mewtwo is one of only 4 legendary Pokemon that could be caught in the original Red, Blue, and Yellow. Add on to that the fact that he was just by far the most powerful thing in the game. I remember taking on the entire Elite Four with just Mewtwo and absolutely trouncing them. It just felt so good as a kid to go back through and tear them apart like that. Mewtwo is also very easy to catch, provided you kept the Master Ball for him. At that point, all you had to do was track him down and toss it. But despite that ease, Mewtwo is also quite intimidating with his harsh eyes and powerful stance. And of course, I wasn't the only one who felt this way. Every kid loved Mewtwo. It was a major reason we all went to the theaters to see the first Pokemon movie. And now that he has a major presence in X and Y, with 2 new forms no less, I'm curious to see if his popularity will be just as strong. Which forms will fans take to more? Will it be the sleekness of Mega Mewtwo Y, or the muscle power of Mega Mewtwo X? Really, we'll just have to wait and see. Like any other kid that grew up with Pokemon, I was a big fan of Pikachu. It felt like an accomplishment when you caught one in Viridian Forest, and he could tear through Misty's gym with no problem. But as Gold and Silver came around, the yellow mouse seemed old hat. I wanted something different, and it looked like I found it in Mareep. It wasn't especially impressive at first, but when it finally evolved into Ampharos, I was sold. I have no idea whether it's true or not, but Ampharos feels like it's one of the most powerful electric Pokemon in the series. And it's a sheep, an animal I have no affinity for whatsoever. But here the concept works, and I end up loving it. It's a staple of any team I make, and probably the Pokemon I will use most for Mega Evolutions in X and Y. There's just something that endears me more to Ampharos than any other Pokemon. Except one, of course. You never forget your first. To understand my love for Squirtle is to understand my love for Pokemon in general because, to be honest, I had no interest in the series. I was vaguely aware of it through commercials and hearing about the TV show, but it just didn't catch my attention. And then one day my mother came home from shopping. She handed me a blue Game Boy cartridge and asked if I had heard of Pokemon before. I explained what I knew before she told me that she randomly found the cartridge in the parking lot of where she was shopping. It looked to be in good condition, so she decided to let me try it. After all, free game. At this point, my only familiarity with RPGs was a few fruitless attempts at my cousin's copy of the Final Fantasy Legend. I would constantly get lost with no idea of what to do, so when I saw that Pokemon had a similar visual style to that, I was immediately nervous. But as you can tell, there was no need to worry. Pokemon Blue eased me into the game and immediately struck my interest in 3 Pokemon. All of them looked kinda cool, but because I saw Blastoise in the cover of the game, I wanted that one. So on instinct, I chose Squirtle. And like many other kids, I was hooked. The battling, the capturing, everything just felt perfect. And the entire time Squirtle was there. It's a strange sort of thing to get attached to Data, but I did. It really felt like he was my partner at the time. And it's something I'll probably never feel in quite the same way again. Everyone remembers their first. When X and Y are finally released, that will be a new generation's first introduction to the world of Pokemon, and all the crazy creations within. They're truly lucky. Thanks for watching, and as I said before, I'd love to hear your own top 10 favorite Pokemon and why you love them. And be sure to subscribe as we cover more on Pokemon X and Y as well as all things gaming.